tower blocks with cladding on ever since 72 people died in the horrendous Grenfell tower fire in 2017. Leaseholders up and down the country have been left worrying about costly but vital works to get their flats up to new safety standards. Later today, Bristol City Council and the Labour MP for Bristol West, Thangham Debonair, are holding a public meeting for residents affected by the issue. It's after the government announced last week how it intends to replace unsafe cladding on tower blocks. Here's the Housing Minister, Robert Jenrick, who made the announcement in the House of Commons.
It was always our expectation, our demand, that building owners and developers should step up to meet the cost of this work. Where they haven't, or where they no longer exist, the government has stepped in. I am therefore, today, making an exceptional intervention on behalf of the government and providing certainty that leaseholders in high-rise residential buildings will face no cost for cladding remediation works. We will make further funding available to pay for the removal and replacement of unsafe cladding for all leaseholders in high-rise residential buildings of 18 metres and above, or above 6 stories in England. Secondly, for lower and medium-rise blocks of flats, the risks are significantly lower, and the remediation of cladding is less likely to be needed. In many cases, it will not be needed at all. But where it is, costs can still be significant for leaseholders, which is why I'm announcing today that the government will develop a long-term scheme to protect leaseholders in this situation with financial support for cladding remediation on buildings between 4 and 6 stories. Under a long-term low-interest scheme, no leaseholder will ever pay more than £50 a month towards the removal of unsafe cladding, many far less.
Well, £50 a month is still quite a lot when you think about it. Robert Jenrick, the Housing Secretary, speaking in the House of Commons about measures to replace unsafe cladding. People in Bristol who live in housing blocks affected are being invited to a public meeting about this later. Steph Pike owns a flat in central Bristol. Good morning, Steph.
Good morning, James.
Good morning. Thank you for coming on the programme. When did you realise the cladding on your block wasn't up to safety standards?
So it's come out over the last year or so. We initially found out we had a small amount of combustible cladding, and we thought that was the extent of the issue. And obviously, as annoying that was, we thought we'd be able to resolve it pretty quickly. But it's since come out that after having a number of surveys and reports done, that there's actually a huge amount of other fire safety defects. So the cladding is just a very small part of it. We've actually got flammable insulation, missing cavity barriers and fire breaks, timber balconies and all of that as well to deal with.
And how does that make you feel when you know that is the case in the place you live?
Yeah, it's not great. There's obviously the worry of living in a flammable building, which if it did set on fire is, well, from what we understand, is likely to go up in flames pretty quickly. And then obviously the financial worry is probably the biggest worry, to be honest, because we just don't know how much it's going to cost at the moment. We don't know when the bill is going to land. Obviously, I've got a professional qualification, and if I go bankrupt, which many people across the country are potentially going to go bankrupt, I'll lose that qualification. So there's all sorts of different worries, and yeah, it's kind of all consuming at the moment.
And you own your flat, so I'm assuming you're a bit worried about the ability to sell it whilst it's got this cladding on it.
Yeah, so I do own it. Luckily, I wasn't planning to sell anytime soon, but obviously the current value of the flats is zero. There are people in my building trying to sell, and I just think unless they sell to a cash buyer for a huge discount, no one can actually sell at the moment. So it's just a really awful situation for millions of people across the country.
And am I right in saying your flat was built after Grenfell?
Yes, so it was actually completed in the autumn of 2017, so when Grenfell would have been at the forefront of everyone's minds. I actually asked the questions about fire safety and cladding to my solicitor, and all of the replies from the seller solicitors came back as satisfactory. So I don't know what else I could have possibly done to satisfy myself that the building was safe. And it's a bit like being missold a product like a toaster or something, and then it turning out to be faulty. And in most circumstances, the manufacturer or the shop would recall it and give you a refund or fix it. But in this situation, it seems like leaseholders have no legal recourse to do anything about it, which is just madness to me.
What do you make of what the government is proposing, which is the buildings over 18 metres or 6 storeys will be covered by a £3.5 billion pot? If you live in a smaller block, some residents will have to pay, although you can access a special loan. Are you pleased with what they've announced?
I'm actually disgusted with it, to be honest. I live in a building that's 19 metres, so I'd miss out on the loan, luckily. But for those poor people that live in buildings below, yes, they get access to funding, but why should they have to pay for it? It's not their making. The developer should have to pay. And a loan capped at £50 is just, it's £50 is unaffordable for a large number of people, especially given the current circumstances with the pandemic. It's not fair. And I don't know who decided that a building that's 17.9 metres doesn't get any funding. The people who do get funding, yes, it might help a little bit to get rid of the cladding, but the vast majority of buildings with the unsafe cladding also have all these other issues. So even where they'll get their cladding paid for in full, they could still have a bill between 10,000 and up to and over 100,000 to fix the other problems. So actually, this small token gesture from the government doesn't actually help anyone really, or give any certainty to any leaseholders, as Robert Jenrick claimed.
What are you hoping comes from today's meeting?
I'm obviously very aware that there's only so much that the local government can do, and we need policy changing from the top and the legislation changing. But I just think meetings like today, they can only be a good thing to increase the publicity and raise the awareness of the matter. And I think, just increase the general understanding and educate people about the issues involved. And obviously, I hope that we'll get an assurance that the local government will continue to lobby on behalf of leaseholders and just keep the pressure on the government to do the right thing and make those responsible pay.